I gotta move this down a little bit, because All right. It's May 2022, and local gas stations have a missing person flyer with my face on it. My story of being a lost person and then slowly rebuilding to become completely found is purely my own, but it is scary to revisit. If I'm being honest, I feel completely blocked at the fact of having nothing but this story to tell. I'm attempting the best I can to recount the memories and facts, but having difficulty for two reasons. The obvious reason being that it was painful. What happened 4 years ago is something that I would like to just brush off as a wild happenstance that isn't part of my story at all. Subconsciously, I know my mind is fighting to recount the events of when I was a missing person, because they are events that were constructed out of deep suicidal ideation, and more importantly, what I thought would be my last days on earth. My developed faith brought a peaceful picture to the end of life scenario I was close to punctuating with a period instead of a semicolon. I really found pleasure in justifying that 34 years of life was plenty. And here's the wild thing that I really didn't tell many people. In the most bizarre way, I justified it because Jesus was only on earth for 33 years. So in my deranged mind at the time, I had a good run, even sufficient enough for the Savior of the world. I vaguely remember the series of events due to the condition of my cognitive state. Some mental health providers would label this foggy mental state as borderline catatonic, as a result of severe depression. And looking back at what I was feeling and my lack of memory of events, I would have to agree. Remembering is like holding my breath under murky water while I try to find a grain of rice among a sea of rocks. And it feels like I'm underwater because I have to hold my breath. And because I have to hold my breath, I can't stay under long, lest I run out of air completely. The thing about being underwater is you really can't hear anything of significance. Or it for sure isn't clear. My family and friends were shouting for me to reach out for help, stay accountable to the doctor's appointments, and just wait once more for another trial of antidepressant that would be the one lucky ticket to make all my worries and stress go away. My symptoms did not come out of nowhere, though. And it was not solely based on the fact that I was 2 years postpartum from delivering my beautiful daughter. The storm that was unraveling in my head could not be chalked up to general postpartum stress, because even though the timeline fit, my history with anxiety and depression had started at a very young age. To sum it up, I had developed a troublesome way of coping with unwanted feelings. Since missing 19 days in a row from school my sophomore year of high school, I had developed a very much all or nothing mentality when it came to being able to pull myself out of bed and continue my day despite breathtaking anxiety. I either mustered up enough strength, anger, and frustration to get to school on time, or I would be Velcroed to the bed for the majority of the day, possibly leaving my room for a drink of water or using the bathroom to make myself sick from all my self-remorse and of not just pushing through my own teenage strength. For years after that troubling sophomore year, I was able to typically place mind over matter, get to school or work, and crush the day as an optimistic social butterfly. I was able to succeed by all accounts as a nursing student and professional working at a big hospital in Omaha. There were many times, when the old habits of sinking back into bed for days would reveal themselves. However, not once in those first 30-some years of my life did suicidal ideations ever enter my mind. Thoughts like those were deemed for the truly troubled, hopeless, not a successful Christian with access to antidepressants and therapy. But when the trifecta of old habits, hormones, and a failing marriage hit at once, well, that's why I even have this story to tell tonight. First, you have to know that in my case, the suicidal thoughts didn't just reach a sudden summit in my head. They've been slowly molded for months. The molding happens after trials of medications, unresolved conversations, and the utter feeling of hopelessness. The clay used for the horrible sculpture of death in my head had different labels. One ugly chunk of clay was labeled inadequate mother. Another piece of clay was labeled silenced wife. A final piece of clay had the name Destructive Habits. Hopelessness is the force that squishes together all that clay to make a pretty grim piece of artwork in your head that eventually drives you into the woods. That's where I went. I was racking my brain all night to find logical relief from panic, but thoughts of leaving my front door with no one knowing where I was the only solution. There was times before that I just needed a quick walk or some fresh air like all new mothers do. But this time was different. I was bound and determined not to return, because returning meant being still in my suffering. Returning meant still not knowing how to speak up when my spouse undermined my thought process of how to take care of our daughter. And returning meant still letting my then mother-in-law down and having to hear about it in daily microaggressions set to break my spirit. Returning meant facing the fact that I truly wanted a divorce because I was about to explode under the pathetic excuse for a marriage that I was a co-part in for 9 years. But I didn't return to the house for 36 hours. So I set off onto the same street that I took my daughter on stroller rides before. I knew that morning was different, as I relished in a little bit of freedom. My destination was not complex or even far away. While I took strides in a despondent and weak manner, I aimed for the large, overgrown forest that separated households from Sorensen Parkway. I had thought of it many times before, and it truly felt like a nice little escape, even among the passing heavy traffic. I literally was dead set on getting to a place my mind found sufficient to just wait around and perish. I can't remember at what time and at what moment it started to rain, but it did, and thank God for that rain. That rain ultimately would be a huge aspect of what saved me. There was an unknown time while in the woods that I befriended a slug. I'm going to let you know right now that the entertainment is severely lacking in the secluded part of the woods. My time was consumed with crying out to God in bewildered screams and having a staring contest with said slug. I stared at it as it crawled its way up the tree branch that was my leaning post for hours. That slug I envied. That slug had just to get from point A to point B and do whatever the hell it is that slugs do in this world. It had no mind to lose. Therefore, I just wanted to be that slug. As darkness fell, I had to commit to staying in the woods and simply wait for my body to cease to exist. But first, due to all that rain and bitter coldness, I had to take off my socks. Somehow, in my twisted plan, I managed to have a brief moment of realization that having cold, soaked socks just wasn't smart, as if going into the woods was perfectly smart in the first place. Oh, how I waited for comfort to overwhelm me with that one big choice, but soon I was just as uncomfortable, wedged in between two trees about 1.5 feet apart. Putting my back on one tree and propping my feet on the other, I was beginning to accept that I would spend the night there and the rest of my hopefully short-lived life. In the complexity of that situation, I really don't remember much significance. But what sticks out is being happy that I didn't ever hear someone shouting my name. A tiny part of me felt successful in the fact that I must have found a pretty good hiding spot. I knew by now people were probably looking for me, because that is what happens when humans are lost. But I never heard their screams through the downpouring rain, and likewise, due to the weather, they didn't hear my desperate screams to God either. I continued to cry and attempt to pray the Lord's Prayer, as I had easily done since my childhood. But the sequence of words to that prayer wouldn't come to me. Therefore, I was physically and spiritually defeated. I'm sure many that have had an attempt to take their own life relate to the bizarre and hateful dialogue that goes on while you're close to the brink of making a decision that ultimately rewrites history. The delusions you think are your own are diluted and morphed into evil. Those thoughts are not of this world and are so far removed from humans' given purpose, which is to reach towards happiness, or at least contentment. I also had a moment of looking deeply into the eyes of a deer across a small stream. That deer, I decided, after a brief moment of astonishment, was a true sign of hope. As I pursued the thought of what it would be like to finally be in heaven, I thought of all the family members that I would finally get to embrace. My Grandma Linda, my Grandpa Irvin, and Grandpa Francis. I felt that deer was an unusual four-legged sign from them that I wasn't ready to come to heaven yet. But as thoughts of actually continuing my life started crossing my mind, so did the massive anxieties of the reality of my fucked up situation. Lauren, you just left. You abandoned your daughter. You ran away from your marriage. You see, what brought me into the woods was suicidal ideation, but what kept me into the woods was unrelenting shame and guilt. I did this to my family. I caused a major upset in the status quo. How could I ever show my face again in society or look into my daughter's eyes? But something happened then. Instead of my mind filling me with images of all the shame, God corrected my thoughts and instead gave me the simple image of my daughter picking where she would go to college or choosing a wedding dress. God blessed me with the most beautiful, heartwarming visions that would speak direct lies to the battle my mind was facing. God gave me the image of me with her during those milestones, and very soon I was filled with the energy to walk back home. I couldn't say that I was looking forward to the unknown reunion at my house, but I was pleased and grateful to God that during those 36 hours of rain and turmoil, my thoughts had not been the end of me. I'm very aware that since I was physically lost, there was a sense of urgency to find me. When someone is physically gone from where they are supposed to be, there is an immediate search. However, so many broken humans go lost every day without anyone knowing. Physically, they are still with us, so there's no need to search for them. But mentally, they are distant, disconnected, and on the verge of being physically lost from this earth also. My brother Michael searched and searched for me, but his searching began months before I went into the woods, because a sibling can tell something's off. And when I was lost mentally, he was there to help me, spend time with me, and listen to me as I tried to make sense of my racing thoughts. And then when I was physically lost, he tried fervently to circle Lake Cunningham on his bike in the rain to find his lost sister. I've tried many times in different ways to end this story, but no amount of adjectives or well-written sentences could ever bring my brother back. You see, he was never physically lost, and I never reciprocated the efforts he put in for me by scouring multiple neighborhoods. He was mentally lost, and unfortunately, we didn't know which way to look despite our best efforts. So my story will never truly end because I'm still trying to explain his.